So the person that buys that hat, what kind of care and maintenance do you recommend that the customer do with their hats once they get them home? And how often should they bring them to you to be reshaped and cleaned and all that?
Okay, well, first of all, they need to go into a plastic hat box carrier, and that carrier needs to be set up properly so that this hat is sitting up on the mounting box where it's meant to set so that it doesn't knock the brim out of shape. And today hat brims tend to be a little bit wider than they were a couple years ago. So a person has to have an appropriate style box, a box big enough to fit these newer style hats.
And you carry those here, correct?
We carry them here. We have some really neat cowhide prints and multicolored print hat boxes that we're doing late this summer.
Now, people that are traveling to and from shows, especially in the summer months when it's really hot and humid, can their hats easily get out of shape if they're sitting in a hot trailer? What do you tell people that are traveling the show circuit? What can they do with their hats?
Never keep your good hats in your trailer unless it's air conditioned all the time. Take them out, put them someplace. Too much heat will ruin $1,000 hat if it sits in a 100-degree car for too long. Now, one thing to remember when buying a new hat is fur felt has memory. That means that it tries to go back to the shape that it was originally, or the way it came in the box. So we need you, when you buy a new hat, to come back in one or two more times and then just touch it up and make sure it's going to be set in the shape that we steamed it in. Another thing people tend to do, you always, if you can't decide whether a hat is a little bit too loose or a little bit too tight, you can't decide what size to wear, I recommend that you buy a hat that's a little bit too loose, because in the shaping process and in the process of your hat not being worn, hats tend to shrink a little bit. So we really recommend to err on the size of a little bit too big instead of a little bit too small.
What's the proper way for people to measure to see what kind of hat, what size hat they need?
Well, that's a very interesting question. We carry American hats, resistol hats, and then we have a small hat manufacturer that makes hats to our specifications, but they're all on different molds. So one brand of hat is going to fit you better than another brand. So you need to decide what brand fits you best. And then hat manufacturers make long oval, regular oval, and wide oval. So there's some allowances there. Say American Hat's your favorite brand, but it always seems a little too loose on the sides and tight in the front and the back. You need to get a long oval. And that brings up something that's interesting. This is a hat stretcher shaper, and this one just elongates your hat. This hat may be just by the time it shrinks, it's going to be a little tight on the front and back. This is the type of stretcher we use. If a guy has a hat that's loose on the front and the back, but maybe a little tight on the sides, here's a hat stretcher we use that widens the sides. So there are a couple different tools we can use to help you get your hat to fit better.
So do most hat companies have standard sizes, like 7, 7 and an eighth? I mean, do they, aside from their molds being different, do they kind of use the same size, or is that different too?
No, for instance, I wear a 7 1/4 in a resistol hat and a 7 3/8 in an American hat. So no, it's not as standard as we'd like it to be. And it depends on who made the hat that day. There's just always a little variance, so you got to try your hat on.
So for people that are going to see this online and want to call you or talk to you about ordering a hat, is that possible if they live out of state?
Sure. What we do is ask them what brand of hat they have now, whether it's long oval or regular oval, and how that fits. And say they called and they wanted a new tan colored or pecan colored hat, and they wanted a American brand. I would know that if they wore a 7 in a resistol, they would need a 7 1/8 in an American brand hat. So it's something that you really shouldn't do just as an online order. You should call here and talk to us before you do your online order, so we can help you get the right size, and then also send us a couple pictures of hats you like the way they're shaped, and that helps us get your new hat looking like the purchase you really want.
So is there a big difference between shaping the felt or the beaver hats versus the straw hats?
Well, in general, a good felt hat is easier to shape than a good straw hat. That's just kind of a general thing, and they're easier to get straighter and easier to get what we want.
So if someone wanted you to shape a hat for them, they live out of state, can they ship it to you and you ship it back, or does that not work very well?
Sure. As long as we have a nice telephone conversation, they email me or text me a couple pictures, we'd gladly do that, yeah.
So is there anything that the customer has to put on the hat to protect it? Like I've seen, like at rodeos, things like that. Sometimes you'll see cowboys with the protective covering, the plastic covering on their hat. Many times you don't. What do you tell people when they spend a good amount of money on a hat? How should they care for it when they get it home?
If you're going to spend a lot of your time, 8 hours out working in the rain with your cowboy hat on, a clear hat protector isn't a bad idea, as long as you make sure you take it off right away, and when you get back in out of the rain, and put your hat at room temperature to dry.
Let's say your hat gets wet. What's the best way to dry it at your house?
You really should have a stand like these hats are on, and put it on a stand. If you don't have a stand, set the hat upside down on its crown or on its top and let it dry at room temperature.
Why on its tops? Just so the moisture can drain off?
Because the brim of the hat is the hardest part to keep in shape. And if you lay it flat, it'll knock your brim out of shape pretty quick. So we prefer the crown.
You sell the hat stands here as well?
You bet. And or you could put it in your hat box. Make sure that it's sitting properly on the rest, and leave the lid off, the lid of your hat can or hat carrying device open, and let it dry that way.
What about for people that have sweat a lot, they're outdoors in their hat all day? What about care for the inside of the hat? If it is dirty and sweaty, and is there anything that you can do?
Yeah, we recommend that use a light leather dressing, a very on the sweatier hat to keep it moisturized so that it doesn't get too dry from perspiration or water and crack. But you have to be very gentle so it doesn't bleed over into the fur of your hat.
What do you recommend for that light leather dressing?
Oh, I think Big 4 is a pretty good product, just a very light amount of Big 4. Now we're having a little bit of trouble here getting one side of this hat to stay up the way we want it. So we're just going to use a little bit of felt stiffener on it. This is what the manufacturers use when they're manufacturing your hat.
And you just spray that on the inside or the underside of the brim?
I just sprayed a little bit of stiffener on there on the underside. It'll stiffen this up a little bit and help this hat tend to stay in the direction we want it. Okay, so here's a hat that is basically ready to be worn for the first time. The gentleman needs to, or our lady needs to wear this hat for about a week and then stop back in and get it touched back up, make sure everything's straight. But this hat's about done and about ready to go. Off to the occasion the person bought their hat for.